Welcome to Learn at Work podcast, which is sponsored by iOS Press, the publisher of Work, a journal of prevention, assessment, and rehabilitation. We're delighted to host this podcast that will bring together insightful conversations and thought-provoking discussions on topics that matter most in the realm of health, rehabilitation, work, prevention, and assessment. What can you expect from our podcast? We'll have expert interviews, individuals who have published in the journal, and we'll dive into conversations with leaders who have shared their valuable experience and expertise. You'll learn about different latest work trends, technology, and best practices. I'm Karen Jacobs, the founding editor of Work, and I'm the moderator of these podcasts. Welcome to this episode of Learn at Work. I'm delighted to have two guests today on our episode, and I'm going to have them introduce themselves and give us a little bit of a background about what they're studying and what they're doing and their career path before we talk about an article where they were co-authors that will be published in Work. So let's start with Marie Ann, and then we'll continue.
Sure. So thank you very much, Karen, for the opportunity to be part of the Learn at Work podcast. So I'm Marianne. I completed my bachelor's and master's in rehabilitation science in occupational therapy at McGill University. So I graduated fall of 2024. And since then, I've been working in Switzerland at a occupational therapy private clinic that specializes in the treatment and assessment of various neuropathic pain conditions.
Wonderful. Thank you. And Farah, how about
Yes,
you?
of course. So I'm Farah. I want to start by also thanking you for having us. It is amazing to be able to discuss this topic with you. And to give you an overview of my academic background, I did a bachelor's in rehabilitation science, majoring in physical therapy at McGill University. And I am currently a third year medical student at the Université de Sherbrooke in Quebec. And if I want to make a link between the two, is I had a lot of knowledge and skills that I have acquired during my studies in rehabilitation science and during my clinical rotations in physical therapy. And these are great tools that I use on a regular basis throughout my medical clinical rotations. And it comes in handy, especially when I'm advocating for my patients and providing them with the highest level of care.
That's wonderful. And congratulations on your medical school and also, Marianne, in the work that you're doing in Switzerland. Boy, two very exciting opportunities that you've availed yourself to. And your background in physical therapy and occupational therapy is wonderful for the topic we're going to talk about today. And again, thank you for being co-authors of a paper. And let me share the title of it. It's Factors Associated with Changes in Employment in Individuals with Long COVID. So let's discuss that now. First of all, maybe one of you could explain um, what is long COVID? I think most people have heard, of course, of COVID, but what is it about long COVID that sets it apart?
Mm-hmm. So long COVID can be defined as having symptoms after a COVID infection. It usually is symptoms that last over 3 months after having an infection with COVID-19. Now, currently in the literature, there is no diagnostic criteria that could help us diagnose long COVID as a syndrome, but differently, we approach it as eliminating other causes that could explain some symptoms or the impact on function in some people. And this is a set of symptoms that are usually present after having a COVID infection.
Great. Thank you so much for that description. Do you have any idea of how many people in Canada or around the world have COVID?
Now, when it comes to statistics, it's hard to get with the numbers, especially that we keep on having new COVID infections throughout the years. Now, many of us have heard about it on the news. It has been a big topic. So there are millions of people over the world that have had a COVID infection. But if I would want to give you some numbers specifically regarding our study and our population, we estimated that in the city of Laval, which is where our study was conducted, approximately 41,000 people were infected with COVID-19, and that was as of 2022. So if I would want to multiply these numbers, it would give even hundreds of thousands across Canada.
Yes. And for people who have long COVID, you have investigated factors that are impacting their employment. Could you share that with us and what your study was about? I'd love to hear more about your study.
Of course. So to give you an overview a little bit is that the literature was describing long COVID syndrome throughout the pandemic and the years following that, and we were looking on its impact and its symptoms. So in that time, we were more interested to look at the impact of long COVID on employment. So when we were designing the study, our objectives were to compare the change in employment in people with long COVID and those who have recovered after having COVID-19 infection. And as you have mentioned, we wanted to identify factors that could be associated with a decrease in employment. Now, these categories of factor, we have demographic factors, we have clinical factors, and in addition to that, we have occupational skill levels that we wanted to look at their association with a decrease in employment if there is any. Now, to give a summary of how we did all of that is that we created a survey that included the Newcastle questionnaire. The Newcastle questionnaire was developed at the beginning of COVID, and it's also known as the post-COVID syndrome questionnaire. So it's a set of questions that is about the symptoms of long COVID. And in addition to that, we included the Yorkshire questionnaire, which also includes the symptoms of COVID. But in addition to that, it gives information about the impact on function and the impact on daily activities. Now, with those, we wanted to look at employment. So we have added questions regarding employment. Our questions were mainly about the level of employment. So is the person being full-time, part-time, unemployed? And that is before and after the COVID infection to allow us to look at the change if there is any. And we also wanted to look at the type of employment. So we have collected the type of job that each participant was doing during the pandemic, before and after, of course. And we have then classified them using the International Standard Classification of Occupation to allow us to look if there are more jobs that are more impacted by the long COVID syndrome. And after our survey was ready to be distributed, we collaborated with Santé Publique of the province of Quebec to allow us to get in contact with people who live in the city of Laval. And we have been able to reach them by email. So we only try to reach people who tested positive for COVID-19 during that period. So we stopped by January 2022. And since we were interested in long COVID, as I mentioned earlier in the definition, participants who were recruited had a COVID-19 diagnosis at least 3 months ago in order to allow us to differentiate between an acute infection of COVID and the presence of the long COVID syndrome.
Thank you for those details and for sharing, especially some of the methodology so we can understand it a little bit more. Um, what were the outcomes that you found?
Mm-hmm. So our main outcomes was to look at the employment and other factors. Our results showed that 15.6% of people with long COVID experienced a decrease in employment compared to 5.4% of people who have recovered. In other words, those with long COVID were more likely to have a decrease in their level of employment. And more specifically, the majority of those with long COVID who have experienced a decrease in employment reported a change from a full-time status to an unemployed status, being a big change in their employment status. Now, when we looked at the factors, we found a few factors that were associated with a decrease in employment, and it was mainly clinical factors. So our study found that having a history of hospitalization due to COVID-19 was associated with a decrease in employment. And this may be due to the fact that those who were hospitalized had more severe COVID-19 infection, which is also associating with being more likely to develop long COVID symptoms. And in addition to that, having been infected more than 1 month ago was associated with a decrease in employment. And we could explain this finding by the fact that people who were infected by the first variants of COVID-19 were more likely to develop long COVID, and they were more likely to experience a greater decrease in function. And when it comes to functional deficits, as you would expect, if there was a change, a moderate to severe change in physical or psychological symptoms, these were more associated with a decrease in employment, which is probably related to certain long COVID symptoms such as fatigue and cognitive difficulties. So this is the summary of our clinical findings when it comes to clinical factors. Now, for demographic characteristics, we did not find any association between demographics and decrease in employment. And our demographic factor that we studied was the age, sex, the educational level, and the social status, which are all usually related to employment.
Thank you for those details. And your paper will be published in the work journal, and others can read it in more depth. As students, you were graduate students participating in this research. Can you share what that experience was like? Because not every student participates in a research study. Um, so, what did you gain from being in such a study as a graduate student?
So Farah and I actually, and correct me if I'm wrong, Farah, started working on this research project as undergraduate students, which was a
Great.
huge privilege. And it continued throughout the start of our master's for Farah and throughout my master's. And so for me personally, it was being able to delve into this realm of research and really um, gain hands-on experience of data collection and then understanding the data analysis. So when it came to doing research projects in graduate school, it was actually a lot easier because of everything we learned with Barbara Mazer and Debbie Fellman, who are professors, and through their guidance, I now understand a lot more research papers when I work because I do have to read a lot of the current research on neuropathic pain. And all of these competencies that I've been able to develop by working on this project allows me to also be a better clinician because I'm able to better understand what results are, what the analysis was done, and how the research was conducted.
Thank you. Thank you. And, I think starting as an undergrad and going through graduate school, participating in this study, really gave you a wonderful foundation. Farah, how about you? What are your thoughts?
I think that my thoughts are very similar to Marianne's. I am interested in research mainly to be able to understand the new clinical findings and how we can use them to cater to our population that we have in front of us in the office, for example. So sometimes we would read the conclusion, but then it's difficult to understand if that would apply to a patient that I have in front of me or a set of group of people. So understanding research was a big part of it. But when it comes to long COVID, I think that Part of it was the unknown that everyone was talking about. We had little to no knowledge about what was going on in front of us, and we were feeling we had our hands tied since we did not know how we can help our patients. So during that time, I was starting my clinical rotations, and we would see people who have a COVID infection, and we would not understand how we could help them in the future to bring them back to their daily life. So being able to contribute to such a project and have a better understanding of how it's been affecting my patients in front of me, but also people around me, my family and friends, having a better understanding was a big reason of why I was very excited to work on this project. And I'm very glad to have been able to be surrounded by such amazing people and such an amazing team. And we have been working together for the last, I would say, 3 to 4 years now. And it has been a pleasure to get to know everyone and to see myself grow in the research field as well.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you. Thank you both. So, how do you each balance, work and when you were in school and still in school, obviously, Farah? What are some meaningful occupations that you do?
I would say I'm still navigating that. I mean, in occupational therapy school, we learned a lot about occupational balance and uh, different strategies and recommendations to provide to our clients so that they are able to attain a meaningful and well balanced occupational repertoire. And having starting work a year ago, I would say it's harder said than done. So I think I've developed more empathy for my clients. But I would say keeping work separate from personal life and engaging in a lot of hobbies, which often we lose as adults. So I've restarted running, I go on hikes on the weekend, and doing a lot of arts and crafts. So I enjoy knitting in my spare time.
Oh, that's wonderful. And you're right. This is something that we work on with our clients, but sometimes we forget about ourselves. So I'm glad that this is something you're addressing. Farah, how about you with medical school?
So right now I find it very hard to find a hobby that I could stick to, especially with the constant change in schedules and the change of location sometimes for my rotations. So finding a hobby that I could keep on doing every single week has been very difficult, but I would look at the bright side and say that I have discovered a new passion for cooking. I just never knew that I was a good cook. So I've been learning how to cook more now that I moved out and I'm making my own food. And I'm finding more pleasure in it since it's something that I would need to do to keep on living. But I have been enjoying trying new things and giving myself the space to experience and get to know what I'm good at or what I like or prefer. So it's been a lot of self exploration journey when it comes to cooking. And I'm very excited to keep on learning that, especially that it's all about wellness and keeping our body healthy. So I am staying positive about what I do with that. And I am trying to find more time to do outdoor activities, but it is difficult, I would say, with the weather. Here in Canada, it's never easy to say I would want to go outside every single day, but it's always great to get some sunshine. So I'm trying to work on both of those things now.
Ah, wonderful. Um, and I love cooking, so I can relate to that. It's very therapeutic for me. So I want to thank both of you for being on Learn at Work. Any last thoughts you'd like to share with our listeners as we conclude this episode?
On my end, just having been able to discuss with a lot of occupational therapists, but also physical therapists who are encountering a lot of clients living with long COVID, in addition to other chronic conditions, is that I do believe we are well equipped to address various long COVID symptoms Obviously, research remains sparse when it comes to long COVID, but there is a lot of emerging research that they can turn to. But in general, a lot of the interventions that we already do with our clients, I think this subgroup of a population would be adequate for the same interventions.
Wonderful. Thank you.
I
And
think this
thank you
was an
again.
amazing summary. Yeah.
What were you going to say? I'm sorry.
I was just saying that was a great note to end this episode. It was a great pleasure to discuss with you.
Well, thank you. Thank you again for being on Learn at Work. And we look forward to future research that you're doing. And hopefully you'll submit it to the work journal as well. Thanks again. And our listeners, thank you for being here.